being born. And it has 40 years of development and history to it. So if we were standing here in 40 years ago, and I used the term Community Development Corporation, everybody in this room would look at me like, what's that? Because there weren't any community development corporations. If we use the term, if I told you that one day, if this is 40 years ago, one day, there would be more people in the United States working in employee-owned companies than there are members of private sector unions, you would say that's impossible. You mean workers are going to own the places where they work rather than be in a union and have that sort of adversarial relationship to management? And yet that's the truth. There are 11,000 wholly or in part employee-owned companies in the United States employing over 11 million people. And that's more than are in the private sector trade union movement now. Now, I don't particularly think that's good, that the labor movement, peaked in the 1950s when 35% of the workforce was unionized, and now it's down to like 10% or even lower. But that's the reality. So there are big changes happening in the economy right now. And we're very interested in the Democracy Collaborative in promoting this new approach to what we call community wealth building. I think with that prelude, what I want to do is not so much summarize last night, but sort of move right into the Evergreen model, show you a kind of 3-minute video, not the one I showed last night, and then we'll sort of take it away. So let's see what we have here. So this is the Evergreen Cooperative Initiative, right? And we have 3 goals in this initiative. And I'll show you the demographics of where this is. So in Cleveland, and it's a very different city than Spokane. So obviously you kind of need to listen to this story and not from, well, that's not our situation at all, so this doesn't apply, but more, okay, that's how they're doing it in that situation. Might there be principles of this strategy that might have some application here? And I'd suggest there probably are. I'm currently working with about 20 cities around the country, and even some in the British Isles, around these ownership questions. And the cities are very different. Atlanta, for instance, Washington, D.C., Amarillo, Texas, are very different places in Cleveland. But in Cleveland, it's a very place-based focus. We're focusing on specific neighborhoods that are very low income, high unemployment. About 43,000 people live in those neighborhoods. I'm going to show you some charts about this. And there are a lot of people out of work. So very high unemployment rate. No one knows exactly, but it's probably 25, 30%. The national average now is below 8%. Very heavily, almost wholly African American. So the goal is to create jobs at a time when there are no jobs being created in these neighborhoods. And I should say these are living wage jobs, and we're intended that they have the appropriate benefits like health care benefits. Secondly, one of our mantras is a job alone is not enough. Now, a job is a lot better than not having a job, right? But the truth is, a lot of the jobs we're able to create at this point are kind of entry-level jobs. And while they carry a salary that's above the poverty line, if you come from a household that's very asset poor, you may not be banked, you may not have savings, no retirement plan, and so forth. Even if you're making a fairly decent wage, let's say you're making $15 an hour. That's above the poverty line, but you're not really going to get ahead very much. If you have one accident, or if a tree falls on your house, as recently happened to me in Cleveland, Ohio, you don't have the money to do something with that. And indeed, one of our big trees came down, and we paid somebody to come and cut it up and cart it away. And I didn't like to pay like $1,500 to do that, but it was like a 70-foot tall tree. A block away, one of our neighbors, we live in this neighborhood, by the way, where I'm going to show you this. A block away, a neighbor had the same thing happen. A tree fell right into their house. And this was probably 6 weeks ago, and that tree is still right there on their house because they can't afford to take it away. So we need to find a way to supplement income, is my point. And we call that generating wealth. And the way we generate wealth Our strategy is to create companies with good paying jobs and so forth that are owned by the people who work in the companies. They're cooperatives, they're worker cooperatives. So that as they become profitable, and it's not easy, anybody that's done small business development knows it's really tough to get profitability, but as they become profitable, who shares in the profits? There aren't outside investors who have put money in who take the profits. The companies are owned internally. So the workers who contributed the labor to make the company a success share in the profits. So they get salary and they get wealth building accumulation. And then finally, our goal is to stabilize the neighborhoods. These have been radically disinvested. They were great neighborhoods back in the 50s and 60s. Then there was lots of turbulence. There were riots, burning, all kinds of things like happened in many urban areas in the late 60s and early 70s in the United States. And so the sort of middle class fled. And so the neighborhoods are very destabilized. So we want to stabilize them and begin to build them. So that's what Evergreen is really all about. But, a lot of this I'm not going to do. So one of the big parts of our strategy, and this may have relevance here because you have so many anchor institutions in Spokane. One of our parts of our strategy is to use the purchasing power of what are called eds and meds, the universities like this one, and the hospitals, which tend to be rooted in place. They're called anchor institutions, and often they're the big economic engines of a community. And we want to find out what are they purchasing, and then try to drive those purchasing, those contracts into the community to put people to work. So rather than buy your stuff from San Francisco or China or Chicago, can we create businesses that can supply goods and services to these place-based institutions right in Cleveland? Put people to work, circulate the money, get a multiplier effect. And so what is an anchor institution? Some ways to think about it is it's sticky capital. In other words, corporations come and go, from communities. They pick up and leave because they're, less stringent labor laws in a certain state, or fewer environmental regulations, or for whatever reason, they can get up and go. Universities tend to stay in place. Gonzaga's been there, I think some say 125 years. I'm willing to bet money, and we could have our children collect it someday, our grandson, that Gonzaga is going to be there in 125 more years. It's an anchored capital in place. Typically among the largest employers in most cities. If you look at most of the big cities in the United States, and may well be the case here, often 5 of the 10 biggest employers in any city are eds and meds. That's certainly the case in Cleveland. The second largest employer in the entire state of Ohio is the Cleveland Clinic, with about 35, I think, 40,000 employees. Another one in the top 5 or 6 is University Hospitals. It's based in Cleveland, about 25,000 employees. So they're big economic engines. Because they can't exit the community, because Gonzaga can't get up and leave, at least they should have a vested interest in their surrounding community. The Cleveland Clinic, as the CEO there said, we have Cleveland in our name. If the perception among everybody in the United States is that Cleveland's unsafe, it's collapsing, it's unsecure, it's kind of, metaphorically burning down around us, then people aren't going to go to Cleveland for their health care. They'll go somewhere else. So it's in the self-interest of the institution to have a healthier, safer community. Typically, they're nonprofit, and the reason I say that is important because as a nonprofit, you have a charitable mission that you are held to account to by the IRS. And that charitable mission, businesses, a typical corporation doesn't have a charitable mission. It has a purpose of maximizing shareholder value. And we could criticize that, or is it short-sighted, but that's just the reality. But a nonprofit has to keep the doors open financially, but it has a social mission. And so that social mission can be appealed to in terms of helping out the community. And largely, these institutions are an untapped potential. There's a huge amount of possibility with them. And so types of anchors, I said universities, hospitals, that's what we typically think of. But obviously local government. The government of Spokane is not moving to Seattle, right? Museums, performing arts centers, even sports teams, some people would say, although some, like Cleveland a few years ago, our team got up and left for Baltimore. But then we stole another city's team, so we got the Cleveland Browns back. But these are the kinds of typical anchor institutions. So here's what I mean about the untapped potential. If you take all the hospital purchasing of goods and services on an annual basis around the country, it's $750 billion, $750 billion being bought by institutions that cannot leave the community. Universities, another $373 billion. So you add that all up, it's north of $1 trillion, which is 6% of the gross domestic product of the United States. It's a huge amount of money flowing through there. Their endowments also are very big. They get to close to $1 trillion. And in the main, until very recently, throughout the country, these institutions were making their financial decisions, what they're buying and what they're investing in, without much of an eye toward community. They haven't thought about that. Now, there's a new trend that started in the last decade or so, as institutions are saying, why does it make sense for us to buy locally? And I should say, I've always worked in the nonprofits or the political sector and worked in the United States government and the Senate, and I'm all for, altruism and doing the right thing and moral and ethical stances and all that. But I also believe that self-interest is really important. And it is really in the self-interest of these institutions as businesses, albeit nonprofit businesses, that they adopt a new stance with how they conduct their business side. So that's a bit about anchor institutions, and just some examples, and now we'll get to Cleveland, and then we'll sort of break it up and talk in. These are different ways that universities are starting to use their financial power to benefit the neighborhoods. University of Pennsylvania, very famous case. Has anybody been to Penn? University of Pennsylvania? So University of Pennsylvania is one of the Ivy League colleges, like Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Brown, and so forth. Very elite school, going all the way back to Ben Franklin. And it's next to, the neighborhood it's next to is West Philadelphia, which has been historically one of the poorest and disinvested neighborhoods in the city. So you have this very elite university right next door, literally across the street, to a really difficult set of neighborhoods. And if you go to the University of Pennsylvania and you look at the buildings that were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you notice something. All the buildings face inward. There are no doors to the streets. There's a very clear communication to the people who live in the community, which is, you're not welcome here. And we're a little scared of you. Something happened about 15, 17 years ago. I believe it was a student and a faculty member in two incidents were shot on campus and killed at an Ivy League school by people who lived in the community, holdouts, whatever. It is front page news of the New York Times. And all of a sudden the university woke up and went, whoa, parents are going to start sending their kids to Harvard, not to Penn. We've got to do something about this. It was a self-interested. Now the president was also very enlightened. She was very progressive, but probably without this motivation. Who knows what would have happened? But the university decided to move, and it did an assessment. It said, how much do we purchase? About $600 million annually. How much do we purchase from the neighborhoods of West Philadelphia? And they took out a map, and you could still see it, and they drew a red line around it. So for these, not just sort of generally, these blocks, how much do we purchase? And what they found is they purchased, I forget the exact figure, it's like $1.2 million of stuff out of $600 million. So their financial power is having zero impact on the neighborhood. And so what they did is they started a systematic effort that continues to this day called the West Philadelphia Initiative. It has many aspects to it. If you go online, you can see big reports. They've started a school in the community that the university runs for the residents. It's a very high-performing school. They're doing all kinds of cool things. One of the things they did was decide to change their procurement pattern. And so today, 15 years after they started this, from let's say less than $2 million in the local community being spent. Today, they're purchasing over $100 million flowing through that community. Now, that wasn't easy. They had to do things like change the incentive structure for procurement officers. So at the end of the year, if you want your bonus and you want a good letter in your performance file and you want to advance, you have a target of how much of your procurement needs to be sourced from the local community. So a very interesting model. University of Cincinnati has a $1 billion endowment. Does anybody know the size of the Gonzaga endowment, by the way? Okay, that'd be an interesting research question we'll get to. So University of Cincinnati has a $1 billion endowment, which sounds like a lot, but among many universities it's not. But it's a good chunk of change, obviously. Typically, they would put this into high-growth tech stocks and hedge funds and all kinds of things. They decided, because they also had a very difficult, disinvested neighborhood right next to their campus, that instead of going for the big bucks now, they'd make a long-term investment in the community with the idea that as it improved, the university would get a better reputation over 20 years, 30 years. You have to have a long-term view. They would be able to draw better professors who would bring bigger research grants, all that. They looked to the future. And so they took 1/10 of their endowment and invested it in community development efforts with a roughly 4% return rate, 4%. So in this market, 4% ain't bad, right? But they decided we're not going to try for 20%, like we have. We're going to go for this relatively moderate. In fact, now they're up to about $128 million. And that starts to really change the dynamic. I won't go into others. Hospitals.
The internet says Gonzaga's got $145 million now.
$145 million. Thank God for the. That's the thing about lecturing now. You can't get away with it. It's brutal. But thank you for that. Anyway, hospitals have been doing the same thing. I won't belabor it. But, preferencing local hiring, encouraging their docs and nurses to live nearby their institutions, buying locally, etc. I gave this example yesterday. University Hospitals very quickly was on a 5-year, slightly more than $1 billion construction effort. Typically, they just get a contractor and say, build us our buildings. They decided to do something different. They did it voluntarily. There was no state requirement that they do this. They decided they were going to drive their money into the local community, and they were going to set targets and hold themselves to account for how many minority-owned businesses were going to get contracts, how many women-owned businesses or FBE, female-owned businesses, and how many workers from the city of Cleveland would be working on these construction projects, not just people in the suburbs who come in but have no connection to the city, and ultimately how much of the money would be sourced regionally, would go to local companies. And they ended up achieving great figures. I've just done a case study on this. I'll show you my Democracy Collaborative website. You could download this study if you want it. Be very useful, by the way, to show hospital administrators in your community what and others they did, because these kinds of institutions respond best to their peers. So it's one thing for us to go out in front and say you should do right by the community, and they go, okay. But if you can get a big hospital system to dialogue with them about how they did it, that can start to move a lot of energy. At any rate, they achieved 93% of the money going locally out of $1 billion. And this happened at the height of the recession. And I was there. The only cranes that were up in the city, the only construction going on was this project. It's hard to believe what the city, and the city was really hard hit. Cleveland lost 17% of its population between 2000 and 2010. It's had a tough time. Had this $1 billion not gone into the local economy, one could hardly imagine what the situation might have been like. So, back to Evergreen. So Evergreen, these are our partners, and there are other institutes. So you can see these, beautiful world-class buildings. These are some of our anchor institutions in Cleveland. If you take the Cleveland Clinic and University Hospitals, and not shown here is Case Western Reserve University, and you add up all their purchasing, it's $3 billion annually. So part of the strategy is how do we capture as much of that $3 billion as we can and keep it local rather than exiting our community. And you see these buildings. I mean, this view. So this is the Cleveland Clinic, one of the great hospital systems. I mean, you know, the royal family from Saudi Arabia flies to Cleveland for medical care at this facility. So it's that kind of place. And this is called the Grand LA. It's a water feature. You can see that. And you can see how beautiful this is. And then right here, there's a street called Chester. And this is what it looks like across that street. So the Grand LA is here. And you see all this vacant land. That's a sign of disinvestment. If we went back in time, 30 years, this isn't parkland. There were structures on that. There were houses. There were manufacturing. There were facilities. They've all come down. There is now in Cleveland, this is a typical story. And this is within a mile of where I live. There are 3,700 acres of vacant land in the city proper of Cleveland. And there's still, because of the foreclosure crisis, there are 15,000 houses that need to be taken down because they've been abandoned and stripped. So this is a set of data points I'm going to show you that was very instrumental in our strategy because we showed them to the leaders of all the institutions in Cleveland that are rooted there in place. So this is, if we turned all the lights up, you'd see it better, but all these little green and yellow boxes, those are vacant properties. And green is, I think, the city's land bank, and yellow is privately owned. But you can see a lot of disinvestment. And by the way, this circle, this is where those big institutions are based. So you see in there, those are their campuses and so forth. There's not much disinvestment, but outside of the circle there is. All of the red little boxes there, those are buildings in poor and unsound condition. So like my neighbor's that has a tree having fallen into it.
Second bottom, you turn on the light, that'll highlight.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm only going to show you a couple more. So all these little dots, if you see a little dot, it's something bad. It's people that couldn't pay their water bills, so their water is shut off by the city eventually. The city's pretty good about, but eventually you don't pay your water bill for 9 months, you're going to lose your water. Places that haven't paid their taxes, their property taxes, so they're in delinquency, and foreclosure from the bank. And if you put all that together, this is the picture. And everything that's in color is bad, right? That's not what you want. The mind-blowing thing about this is all of this data was assembled in 2005 and 2006. The foreclosure crisis didn't hit till 2007, 8, 9, and the Great Recession didn't hit. Well, Lehman Brothers went down in 2008. So it predates two of the biggest financial crises our country's seen, since the 30s. And this is what the situation looked like. So, the strategy is, how do you break down this wall where there's $3 billion flowing through here, where there are tens of thousands of people employed, and how do you break that down for the benefit of the community? And that's, at its essence, that you could say is what the Evergreen strategy is. Now again, I know the situation is very different in Spokane, but you should open your minds up to the possibilities, what might make sense. And I showed this last night. We have 3 Evergreen companies. And let me, I want to be really explicit here. Evergreen's a pretty neat story. All of us who work in it, we love it. And it's got, I think, a very kind of compelling vision. A lot of people have told me. I don't want to overhype this. We're not out of the woods yet. We're still learning. This may or may not work ultimately. We've made some good progress. We've made a great number of mistakes. We're learning. This has never been done this way in the United States before. So it's like, learning to play the violin in public. You're always kind of out there. And sometimes it's really working, sometimes not. So at any rate, we started 3 companies so far, and we have more in the pipeline. And the 3 are the Evergreen Cooperative Laundry. These are first 2 gentlemen who are hired, Keith Parkham and Medrick Addison, as supervisors in the company now. It works in the healthcare bed linen arena, so don't think of a dry cleaner. think of a 16,000 square foot facility with a couple $1 million of equipment, with one washing machine. I know so much about laundry now. It's funny. It's called tunnel washer. It's 30 feet long. A washing machine, 30 feet long. It's incredible. It's computerized. People have been taught, how to run all this equipment. It's the greenest commercial laundry, at least in Northeast Ohio, probably in the state of Ohio. It's an elite gold building. It has, we use about 1/5 of the water of our competitors, and so forth. The average salary is $15.50. It's a cooperative, so the members own the company. I'll show you the structure. They own 80% of the company. Then we have a holding company that owns 20%. And it does nursing homes, retirement homes, sheets and towels, some hospital, hotels, and like that. So that's one company. There's currently about 30-some people in it, and ultimately when it's maxed out at volume, it'll be a 50-person company. That's the size. And it's not going to grow to 100 because you can only put so many sheets through there, but 50 people. Evergreen Energy Solutions does a variety of services. We've done weatherization of homes. We do solar installation. We don't do homes, we do the large roofs of buildings like this, right? So this is a big nonprofit building because it's a university. And because of that, it's hard for the universities often to do solar because as nonprofits, they can't take the tax credits from the federal government. But Evergreen's a for-profit company, and so it can get the tax credits. So we do these installations. We've done about 600 kilowatts to date of installed solar. When we started this, Ohio only had about 2 megawatts of installed solar in the whole state. And so we've added another 600 kilowatts. Takes 1,000 kilowatts to make a megawatt. And then we're about to start a solar field, our first one. We've assembled 5 acres of land, and we're putting on it about a megawatt of installed solar being a couple thousand panels. And then Green City Growers, some of you saw the video last night when we're done here. If anybody wants to, it's a 7-minute video. I could show it, but I won't show it again. It's the largest food production greenhouse in a core urban area in the United States. We think it's probably the largest local food initiative in an urban area. On a 10-acre side of land, we built a 4-acre facility. 3 1/4 of that 4 acres is the greenhouse itself. We're growing 3 million heads of lettuce and 300,000 pounds of herbs. And again, there are about 25 people working in that company now. It'll get up to 40, 45 eventually. And it's all hydroponic. So our strategy, to sort of sum up, we work with the anchor institutions to try to see what they're purchasing and what can we drive locally. They're very much our partners in this. In fact, the place we've gotten to is kind of co-development of these businesses with the anchor institutions. We're trying to meet their needs. Second, we're creating community-based cooperative businesses right where people live. And by the way, one of the limitations of economic development in the United States is we often say, well, it's cheaper to site the business 10 miles out of town, in the suburbs somewhere. But the problem is the people who you want to get the jobs in this strategy, half the people we've hired don't have transportation. They don't have cars, or they don't have licenses. So they can't get to work. So we need to put the businesses in the community and on bus lines and like that. We're committed to green, and by that we mean an Evergreen company. If you compare it to the same kind of company in Ohio in the same sector, ours will be greener. We'll use less water. We're very intent on adding jobs, not taking jobs from people who live in the suburbs and move them into the inner city and then throw people in the suburbs out of work. That's a big challenge, how to do that. So we look for where is our economy expanding. Healthcare is one of the big areas to expand. Also, we have an aging population in Northeast Ohio. Local food is a big thing. Ohio's an agricultural state, but basically what it's growing is commodities because of U.S. government agricultural policies. So we grow lots of corn for biofuel and lots of soybeans, but almost no leafy green vegetables. So, the lettuce weed in Northeast Ohio comes from California and Arizona, and that's 1,500 miles of trucking and carbon-based transportation. So we may have some negative impact on somebody somewhere in California, although our volume probably not, but we're not putting any lettuce growers in Northeast Ohio out of work because there are very few of them even there. And then we want to move to scale. So, and this is the laundry. That's heat at work. This is a solar installation on the roof of the Cleveland Clinic. We do on-the-job training. People are learning how to do this with. This is the greenhouse outside on a foggy day. This is inside what it looks like now. These are some of the workers who are in this incredible facility that ultimately they will own. I've talked all these. We have a number of principles that are the basis of our company. And I think we stop there. So our goals are to create jobs for neighborhood residents, living wage jobs. We offer, by the way, if you're a member of the co-op, you start out as a kind of temporary worker, sort of probationary for the first 6 months, and we see how you do. Do you buy into the concepts, and are you a good worker and a team player, and like that. And then at the end of that 6 months, whether you stay or not and become a member of the co-op. So the first 6 months you're not a member, which means you're not an owner. And after 6 months, there's a vote to determine whether you become a member of the co-op. And the vote is taken by the other members of the co-op. So they're judging whether they want you in their company because, it's going to impact them and the bottom line of the company. And once you become a member, you get a raise, and you also get a no-cost healthcare package. We want to anchor the capital so it doesn't get up and leave. We want to build assets, which is through the profit sharing. We want to stop money from leaking out of Northeast Ohio. I don't know if I used this figure yesterday, but I think probably. But in Northeast Ohio, we purchase $8 billion of food every year in Northeast Ohio, and only 200 or 300 million of it is grown in Northeast Ohio. So we're not getting a multiplier effect. The money is being sucked out of our region. So we want to keep the money circulating, stabilize and vitalize the neighborhoods. And maybe that's, we have a big structure, and we can go into that if you want. I spent a lot of the last year working on construction. But let me just end, I think, with Mondragon, because it's one of the great influences and inspirations for us. I mentioned last night, but not to belabor it, but the question is, can a strategy like Evergreen get to scale, right? Because our ultimate goal is to transform neighborhoods and the city of Cleveland. And 3 companies, even if they each are high performing and turning out a good profit, and each are employing 50 people, and that's 150 people, and then let's say, for the sake of argument, everybody, all those 150 have 3 members in their family, so that's 450, so that's 600 people, right, who are benefiting. But there are 43,000 living in the neighborhoods. So 600 being positively affected, that's not bad, and that's hard to do, bless you. But it doesn't get to the transformation in the community. And so we need to get to scale. And we think that scale is, maybe 1,000 jobs, maybe more than that. But it needs to get to something significant. So can it get to scale? And, one of the limitations of these strategies in the United States is they often don't. We create these beautiful models. They're very cool, and they're environmentally great, and they have diverse leadership, and they're place-based. They have all the, I kind of think of them like Fabergé eggs. They're just so fantastic. Except, there's only a couple hundred Fabergé eggs in the world. I mean, they don't change things. They're great models of what could be, but they don't get to scale. So can it get to scale? And the jury's completely out on that. Theoretically, yes. We have anchor partners. They're purchasing $3 billion of goods and services. We have the support of our mayor. We're starting to get a track record. But can it get to scale? And one of the things we look to is sometimes when it looks darkest, and you're thinking, oh my God, you know, we'll never be able to show our face again in Cleveland. Is this ever going to work? Is Mondragon. Because the Basques in the 1950s, and their situation was incomparably worse than anything going on in the United States, including like in inner city Detroit right now. The Basques were really down and out. They're being suppressed by their national government, General Franco, who was the dictator at the time, and he was the dictator for over 40 years in Spain. They have their own very interesting non-Romance language. No one sort of knows where these Basques, it's like they came from Mars. Their language is so different than anything being spoken anywhere in the world. And Franco tried to exterminate their language and forbid it being taught in schools and forbid people going to university and so forth. So they decided to do for themselves, to rally themselves and build their own economy. And so they started the Mondragon Cooperatives, and they started with 3 or 4 or 5 people. And today there are about 120 companies that are networked together. There's a Yes magazine that's outside there when you checked in. If you didn't get it, get it, because the whole magazine is devoted to cooperatives and some good stuff about Mondragon. There are something like 85,000 or so workers in this large network corporation, almost all of whom are owners right now. There's a film tonight, by the way, that's being shown. What time's the film?
6:30.
6:30, is that over at Gonzaga?
Yeah.
So there's a film, 6:30, called Shift Change. One of our esteemed filmmakers is here. And Michelle and Mark went to Mondragon and filmed what was going on, as well as Evergreen things, but particularly Mondragon. And no one had been there since the BBC in the 80s, something like that. So it's really interesting, new footage. You get to meet the people in the Basque region. They're the 7th largest corporation in Spain. They have the 3rd largest bank. They made over $20 billion of revenue last year. And they have the lowest unemployment rate probably now in all of Europe. The unemployment rate in Spain is 25% as a whole. I just heard the unemployment rate in Europe now is, I think, 11.5%. They're in much more difficult shape than us. In the Basque region, the unemployment rate's below 9%. Because they keep people working as a matter of principle. So that's the Evergreen story. And I think just to conclude, let me show you a 3-minute video, and then we'll talk about does any of this traffic here, or I'll answer any questions. So this is 3 minutes, and it's called How Evergreen Cooperative.
It gave me a second chance, I'll tell you that. I mean, I was looking at no job, no future, not a lot out there right now. And they came in, gave me a job, took care of me. They've actually given me a lot more responsibility than I ever had before. They believe in me. I'm moving up the ladder pretty good. It's actually been a great opportunity for me.
They give it back to the community, giving people hope, giving people jobs so they can succeed in life.
To make it way, like, as far as providing for myself, being able to have my own place, transportation to be able to get back and forth to work, being able to provide for my family, you know. So before that, it was very far and few in between that I've been able to do that. So it's changed my life for the better.
You know, as a younger man, making bad choices, you know, going to prison, that sort of thing, and turning, you know, becoming, I look back on that person to who I am today. Total different in contrast, total difference. You know, I was a recluse, I was bitter, you know, now I'm more outgoing, I can speak to people. You know, I love telling them about Evergreen, what Evergreen's done for me, what I've done for Evergreen, and what we've done together, you know. So.
I kind of made a conscious decision to change my life, but it was hard getting the opportunity to prove myself. Evergreen has given me that opportunity. It's given people opportunity to be something. And I take that, I really appreciate that.
If it wasn't for Evergreen and the cooperative, I don't know where I'd be right now. As far as any, you know, it's hard to get a job now anyway. And then
having the opportunity to, you know, have a career, this is just great, man. I mean, they changed my life in a lot of ways.
It's great. I get to own my house. Stay in my house, pay my bills.
Before I came here, I was being managed. Now I'm a manager, so it makes a difference. Actually, it's been a learning experience for me the whole time. Each day is something different, and I love the opportunity.
It's putting actual wealth-building material into the hands of people who would normally not have that opportunity. It's making them their own CEO.
Kind of may give me a little bit of sense of confidence, a little sense of pride, you know, to make me feel like I'm doing something positive with my life, because I feel like a few years ago I wasn't able to say that. A lot of people look at me with respect, you know, a lot of people look up to me now. I walk with my head high and make me proud.
Has enabled me to be a contributor not only to the community but to society as well. And it gives me a sense of confidence knowing that I can get up in the morning and come to work. And to me, that's freedom.
So that's one way to look at the Evergreen story from a lot of people working in it. There's two resources for you if you want to explore Evergreen more. And you can go to Evergreen Cooperatives with an S.com, and there you can see lots of videos and sort of what the laundry's about. And if you want to buy, a couple 100,000 heads of lettuce, they tell you how to do that. And then the other thing is my organization, the Democracy Collaborative. We're redoing our main website, but our sort of research website about all these different models and new economy stuff is called community-wealth.org. And here's a new report we've done about how hospitals are investing in their communities. This is an interview we did with a fellow. He's in Colorado. He's the CEO of a really extraordinary worker cooperative solar company called Namaste. They have 100 people working in this company. They made $15 million of revenue last year. Here's Jacksonville, Florida, and some of the innovative things they're doing. Here's that report about university hospitals. I told you about the case study I did with MIT, and you can study that. So anyway, those are some resources. So I think I should shut up and answer your questions, but really, if those of you who know this area, what do you think? Maybe we could talk about your anchor institutions, like that. Yes.
I was struck last night by the graph that was showing that 51% is local government, but half of that is education.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we can say pretty confidently that eds and meds are a big part of the Spokane economy as well.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. One of the I've conducted. So, did you all hear that? It was first of all, last night we looked at there was a presentation on the local economy in Spokane, and one thing that was noted is how much of the resources going into this area are really from local government, broadly defined, not just City Hall, but for instance, the whole educational system. And one thing I do, I've done with 5 or 6, I think, to date, cities, and it's how we started in Cleveland, is conduct a feasibility study. So I'm a big believer in doing research designed for action on the local area and local economy. And, for one of the times the light bulb went off for us in Cleveland is when we did enough of assessment of the procurement numbers of these large institutions to realize, oh my God, there's $3 billion flowing through these, not when something special happens, but every year, year in, year out, good times and bad, they're spending $3 billion, but look at the neighborhood. And so, one could imagine doing that sort of feasibility study here and, listing all of your anchor institutions and how many people are employed. I mean, all this data exists. It's sometimes harder to get the procurement data, but you can do that and sort of paint a picture of what the local economy is from these anchors. Yes?
I'm going to ask you some questions on detail. may relate to adopting here for Spokane. So if you want to cut me off at some point, maybe you can take it offline. But does your dental and optical in your
These are very specific. I don't know.
Is your entity Ohio State Co-op Corporation?
Yes, all of these companies are incorporated in the state of Ohio under Ohio cooperative law. And every state has different co-op regulations. And, you know, a co-op there's very specific, it has specific accounting, legal ramifications, but also governance, who could sit on the board. So the members need to elect a certain percentage of the board, for instance. So you saw Medrick saying, you know, I used to be, when I went to prison, and this sort of burly guy. He ran for the board and was elected by his fellow workers, so he sits on the board, for instance.
So in some states, I know that the cooperative corporation is actually, the stock is held by the incorporators, and then the members are then a different class. Do you know how yours is structured?
Yeah, we have basically two classes of stock in the company. 80% is owned by the members who are workers, so the people you saw on those videos. And by the way, you know, the nature of a co-op is it really is one person, one vote. So it doesn't matter whether you make more money or you've been there longer, you have a share. Each person has a share. The other 20% of the shares are owned by a nonprofit holding company we've created called the Evergreen Cooperative Corporation, which, not to belabor it, but just to show you this diagram. So this is our structure, and we don't want to go into all this, and we're actually reworking them. But these are the businesses at the heart of the system. And then we have a fund that helps finance it. We have a business services division which develops new companies and provides back office support. So every one of these companies doesn't have to have its own HR person or its own accounting person. That lives here and they contract with that. We have a real estate division which owns the land under the greenhouse, for instance, and we want to turn it into a land trust, we hope one day. But at the top of this is the Evergreen Cooperative Corporation, which is a tax-exempt 501c3 for those of you who know the nonprofit world, nonprofit corporation. And it owns 20% of each of these companies. And the reason it has an ownership stake is because, you know, one could envision, for instance, if you have 50 people working in the laundry, and let's say the laundry is worth, you know, $5 million, and then a large company, a competitor, comes to them and says, you have this nice laundry at $5 million and these great customers, and we'll give you $7 million to buy your laundry. And in other words, to what in cooperative speak is called demutualize. So it would no longer be a co-op, but the 50 people would benefit enormously, right? And if this is about wealth building, it would make total sense. It'd be rational for them to sell their companies and cash out and get all that money. But that would be against the mission of what we're trying to do, which is provide ongoing employment, stabilize the neighborhoods, good quality jobs, and so forth. So in order, if they wanted to be mutualized, they would have to go to the holding company and get a supermajority of the board of that company, which owns stock, and that's what their stock is in that sort of detail rate, to agree to do that. And the board of the corporation has on it representatives of the companies. It has representatives from the city government, representatives of the anchor institutions, representatives of some of the funders like the Cleveland Foundation, which has been the major financial backer, and some business leaders. So from the community. So the CEO of the Cleveland Indians, the baseball team, sits on this board. as a commitment to this whole structure. So
Is this available on the website?
I think it is, yes, but I'd be happy to provide this PowerPoint. I know you've got some more. Let me go there and then we'll come back. Yeah.
What's the total number of people on the board that vote that regulate that kind of thing?
You know, this board, God, I mean, it keeps growing. I think there are about 15, somewhere between 15 and 20 people.
So if they all vote in favor of something, then it's 20% of the total vote that would be in favor.
No, the way to think of it is that the holding company, in a sense, has a golden share that conveys with it some extraordinary rights. Only a handful of them. So, like if a company wanted to sell the private interest and stop being a co-op, that's such a mission critical decision. You want to have that decision taken not just by the people in the company, but on behalf of the whole strategy and the whole effort. If a company said we want to leave Cleveland, it's better for us to move to Shaker Heights. We pay more taxes in Cleveland. Let's get out of Cleveland. That would be so essential because the whole thing is to turn around this neighborhood in Cleveland. So those sorts of decisions, ultimately, this company gets to decide. The other thing the way to think about this is it's sort of the keeper of the overall mission. So one of my projects this year, and I'm on the board of this as a non-voting member, but as a founder of it. One of my projects is to develop a training program for everybody in the Evergreen system so they understand what this is all about. And it will have financial literacy and how to, these companies belong to the people working in them. They need to be able to read a profit and loss statement. So there's training about that and conflict management. And then what is a co-op and how's a co-op, and then all the green stuff happens so that workers can keep innovating and making their companies more sustainable. And that training program isn't being created by any of these companies. They're not paying the price. It's being created up here, and then it will be made available to everybody in the whole system. So that's the kind of thing that the holding company does. As well as raises the funds that go into this fund that help build these companies. All right, back to you.
The management structure of each cooperative, you have, for your greenhouse, you have a sales manager and some salespeople, two or three, or maybe one. Is their payment, their compensation, a commission maybe, or does everybody get the same wage?
Not everybody gets the same wage. We've, again, sort of modeled what they do in Mondragon, and roughly in Mondragon, most of their companies, the wage differential is about 5 to 1. So the CEO of a company would make, 5 times the lowest entry member in the co-op. So in Mondragon, the lowest paid worker as of 2 years ago, the last time I was there, is making 14,000 euros a year. So that would mean the CEO is getting 70,000. There is a difference with the bank. The ratio is 9 to 1, but this is this important concept to get because I don't know what it is now, but like 4 years ago in the United States, the difference in the Fortune 500 between the CEO and the lowest worker was something like 409 to 1. So we're talking about 5 to 1, 6, 7 to 1. People aren't on compensation. People are salaried. I mean, they're not on commission.
So does salary setting part of what the
holding company does?
Control?
It sets the guidelines like this. It should be roughly 5 to 1. I mean, ultimately, there's a board for each of these companies, and they determine that. But again, if a company went out of whack and said we're going to pay the CEO $1 million, there would be a conversation with the holding company.
Or if they went out of whack and they said we're not paying anything this year.
Yeah. you know, all of this is in evolution, and as we've implemented it, we see all the questions that haven't been answered. And so that's a big part of this, is trying to design, you know, it's a kind of constitutional design question. Yes. Yeah. If we're doing it from scratch, what would we do differently? Let's see. I think well, you know, we've learned a lot. We have the scars to prove it. One thing is, I would never start up a company. I'd be willing to invest in business planning and market analysis, and is there a viable business there? But I would not raise the capital and invest in a company until I had firm commitments to purchase the services, the goods of that company. And that's what we learned. So with the laundry, we operated a bit, you know, I think in hindsight, I would say naively. We had a lot of interest from lots of institutions that did lots of laundry, and it was a little like that, you know, baseball movie, if we build it, they will come. And they didn't come in the volume we thought. And so that's really, you know, been a great challenge, and we've made great progress on that. But before we pressed the button and invested in the greenhouse, we tasked the CEO with going out to the local food hub and getting letters of intent to purchase and letters of commitment that would total the break-even point of the company. And the break-even point was $1.7 million, and she came back with letters of commitment of $1.9 million. So that's one thing. I think I would also, the biggest challenge we've faced has not been the people you saw in the video, the line workforce. And, you know, one could think that would be, because lots of people, you know, a fair number of our people have had significant barriers to employment, many with criminal records. And so, you know, it might be natural to think, well, that's going to be a difficult workforce. You know, I mean, as far as I could tell, even in my little organization of 12 people, workforces are always difficult as far as I could tell, because we're all human, but not inordinately so. But our biggest challenge has been getting the right management to come in with the right experience and expertise, because no one's going to get rich out of this, right? So you're not going to get an entrepreneur who comes in and builds this company and puts everything into it, and then the back end is going to cash out, because that's not how it works. So I think initially we didn't pay enough attention to the process for recruiting that kind of support. And then frankly, I think if I were doing this again, I would try to fly under the radar more. We've gotten, you know, we've done some good work, and we have made real progress. But as I said, you know, really, I don't want to overhype this, but it's gotten, I think, because of the desperation in our cities and the difficulties of moving the dial at all on jobs and economic development, somewhat because of the limitations of traditional strategies, and just because when you see a video with people like that in it, you know, it just touches you. You go, God, shouldn't we be doing that? As a result, we've gotten a huge amount of attention, more than we wanted. And that's a big challenge. Now, the good part is it helps you raise money, for instance, but the bad part is everybody's looking and waiting for you to fall off the cliff. Back there and then over there.
Go to those acre institutions and you find that the purchasing departments are somewhat siloed from the main organization.
For sure.
What lessons have you learned about forming relationships with the purchasing group?
Yeah. That's a really, I mean, that's sort of at the heart of this, because these institutions, they're tough nuts to crack, right? And they're used to sort of doing it their way, and in truth, even though they have a self-interest, to be part of the community. And often these institutions don't talk well with, the community. And so what we've done, we didn't even get into procurement. First of all, this takes time. So this isn't sort of next month, who do we go see and convince them to start purchasing stuff differently. This is a long-term play. So it's not a short-term sort of silver bullet, let's make something happen. I think, though, it's the right way to create something sustainable for the long term, but it takes time to build it. And where we began in Cleveland was and I wasn't even involved at that point, but the sort of conversation is who, and it could be institutional, not just the person, who could bring these institutions to the table to begin to explore these kinds of questions. And it became very clear, and I see it in cities everywhere, that it can't be like a local community group. The institutions just don't respond sufficiently. They respond to peers. They respond to a safe space, that sort of thing. So what's worked in most communities, certainly worked in Cleveland, was local philanthropy, which often has a community development funding stream and economic development funding stream and so forth, became persuaded that they could bring the anchors to the table, and specifically the Cleveland Foundation. And Cleveland Foundation, now we're very fortunate, it's a big foundation. It's the oldest community foundation in the country. It turns 100 years old next year. But it's seen as a kind of honest broker. Whereas, if one hospital had stepped forward and said, let's do this, the other hospital would never have done it because they're fierce competitors. But the foundation was able to sort of set the table and create a dialogue around the lines of, well, we're all here. None of us are going anywhere. The community's really in distress. It's bad for all of us. Let's talk about what we could do together. And that's sort of where this began, and I've seen that over and over. So in the Panhandle in Texas, it's the Amarillo Area Foundation that's bringing people together. So that's the first thing, is how do you get people at the table? And that's way before procurement. And then the next thing is, well, what should they work on once they get to the table? And in the Cleveland Foundation, if you see up here, there's this thing called, this stands for Greater University Circle Initiative. And that was started by the geography I showed you with the neighborhoods and the institutions, that's called Greater University Circle. It's this big sort of 4-mile by 4-mile space. And the anchors are there, and so they started to work together. And one of the things they worked on, even before they got to procurement, which is part of kind of a tough one, they worked on some other things, like a joint employer-assisted housing program. How do we encourage all of our staffs to move closer? They looked at their master plans where they were doing new construction, realized that they could make some changes to the transportation system locally that would benefit the community and them. So they found things to work on together, and that sort of built trust. We could work together because they hadn't in the past. They just had not done that. And then we got to, well, how could we start to conduct our business in a way? And that's where we got into purchasing. And so ultimately, you need to get the buy-in, I think, in my view, of the senior leadership of these institutions, who all of a sudden the light bulb goes off for them and says, yes, we can do this. It's going to take something, but it's really going to benefit us. It's good, it's good in many, many ways. And then that starts to filter down to everybody. And so now we've conducted focus groups but it took time to get there, but of all the procurement officers in one of the hospital systems. We got 100 people in the room. That's how many procurement people they had. So many that many of the people had never met each other before. And so we brought them all together, and out of that, some new business ideas began. But it's that sort of step-by-step process. But if I were beginning, in addition to sort of understanding the landscape of the institutions and how much resources flowing through them, how many people they hire, do they ever work together already in some joint forum and so forth, I would try to get either local philanthropy or someone with the respect. You know, it might in some places be a mayor, but usually the mayor's got an agenda that is difficult for the institutions. Yeah, back then.
Yeah, I was wondering, what has been the response of the city government as well as the state government?
The city government's been fantastic. The mayor, Frank Jackson, is our mayor's in second term. He came from one of these neighborhoods. He represented on the city council, and he still lives in. So
Now, Cleveland is a city
county. It has a city government, and then there's Cuyahoga County has an executive. It used to have a different system, but 2 of the 3 commissioners are now residing in federal penitentiaries, so they've got a new structure.
They offer tax incentives?
Well, so the city government's been very helpful. Now, you know, we're lucky because we have a mayor who, he puts it in a way that I don't put it, but he says, you know, the responsibility of the city is to take care of, he calls them the least of us. In other words, the people that have had the most difficult time. I don't know. Anyway, I don't quite say it that way, but his heart is in that direction. And so what the city's done is, you know, the 10 acres of land our greenhouse is on, the city helped us assemble that. It was a brownfield site. The city worked with us to persuade the Department of Housing and Urban Development to give us a $2 million Betty grant, which is a Brownfield Economic Development Initiative grant to clean up the land. The city has access to block grants and HUD 108 money, which is 20-year, very low interest money, great money for a strategy like this. It's debt, but it's cheap money. The city has programmed, you know, several millions of dollars of HUD money into this. Now we have to pay the city back for this, but it's good money. Yeah, and the city's done other things like that. The state government, you know, not so much support. I mean, the truth is we haven't worked a lot with the state. They've helped us with the solar company because there was a state renewable energy mandate, and that's helped us. We are very close with our senior senator, Sherrod Brown, from Ohio, who has helped us a great deal with, you know, Commerce Department and HUD.
When the state of Washington, you have procurement laws?
Yeah.
Or something like brutal. Because in the state of Washington, you can't even purchase a computer cable without going out to bid.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about beyond that whether there are exceptions for minority and female industries in order to encourage procurement.
Yeah.
From, well, there is, but most benefit local.
Yeah. That would be an important part of research. Like in Cleveland, they've recently passed a bill. Were you there last night?
No.
Okay, so last night I had a slide that Cleveland has, for the city, has passed new regulation that if you are a locally owned firm or a minority or a green firm, and you know, let's say that, you know, a big General Electric or somebody comes in for, you know, $1 million as their bid for this contract, and you come in at $1,100,000, or something, because you're not as big a guy. If you're local and you can prove it and all that, they'll discount 2% to make it competitive, and because they want to get the money going locally. And as a result, in the last year or so, they've put $85 million into the local economy that would have gone outside the economy. So some of this does get to policy considerations. Yeah. Well, yes.
You talked about putting in a component to educate the workers now.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in London they have their own university.
They do.
How do you, I mean, it seems like in the United States, especially in a place like Cleveland where you have so many universities congregated in a small area, that just like in Spokane, might be a place to start.
Yep.
If you can bring those universities on board and
Yep.
get them cooperating together.
Yep.
And I know that funding for people without a whole lot of resources maybe minorities or disadvantaged folks is often available by state and
Yep.
federal government. Is there some kind of structure for that?
Yeah. So the question was about education and noting, to those of you who weren't there last night, that in Mondragon in Spain, one of the cooperatives that they've established is a cooperative university, which, you know, is kind of mind-blowing here to think that a third of the board of the university will be appointed by the faculty and a third of the board by students. And, you know, so it's a wild system, but 4,000 to 5,000 people go there. And it's an important pipeline of business talent and engineers and so forth into the Mondragon system. And it's what helps build their culture. We haven't done anything like this. See, this is why I think I'm so hopeful that not that people will take what we've done in Cleveland and try to stamp it out the same way, but that there are some elements that could be brought together because, you know, we can only see what we can see in Cleveland. But here in Spokane, I mean, maybe the way to start is actually through a cooperative education program and get universities on board with that somehow. But we're not doing that in Cleveland. We're doing internal education training of all of our workers and our boards and so forth. My organization, the Democracy Collaborative, is working to develop curriculum for business schools around these community wealth building mechanisms because students aren't learning that sort of thing. You know, I lecture every year at the Weatherhead School of Management, which is at Case Western. They bring me in to their master's students. But that's just sort of a one-off thing. It's not a real curriculum. There are a couple places in the United States where you could go to learn about employee ownership or get degrees, but not very much. It's generally not taught. That would be very high leverage. I think. What else? Yes?
You talk about bringing the companies to scale and models. You maybe to both of these things, but you see it more as having these three or maybe a couple more companies that start to capture more of the market for lettuce, solar panels and laundry, or do you see roughly the same sort of market share for these companies, but then you get one with a similar market share for peppers, and then another one for
Yeah. You know, our strategy, and again, who knows if this is the right one, but our strategy, we think it builds more resilience into the system if we have a network of a number of companies, not trying to get really big and dominate the market. You know, our sort of sweet spot is, can we get a company, you know, with 50 or so workers that's, you know, with revenues of $5 or $6 million or something like that. That's sufficient, actually. So we would like to see a resilient, integrated network of, you know, food production, and maybe food production. There might be other greenhouses in other types of food, and then maybe companies that build on that and do value-added food products, and then a solar company, and then a green construction company, and one of the things we're looking at is a warehousing function to take over the internal inventories of these hospitals and manage them for them. We're looking at recycling companies and reuse companies at different times. You know, one thing, you probably don't have it out here, but in a lot of older industrial cities, there's this huge problem that's called combined sewer overflows, where you get these old cities like Cleveland and Washington, D.C., and Detroit, and Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. And when it rains really heavily, like a big rain, sort of all the stuff you don't want to go into your river ends up in there as these sewers combine, and it just, you know, it just gushes. You know, the technical term would be crap into the water, and it's a real mess. And so the EPA has all these cities, hundreds of cities, under a mandate, a consent decree that cities have signed, like Cleveland, where they have to clean this up over a 10, 15-year period. There are billions of dollars going to be spent on this in city. I mean, tens and tens of it. It's going to be probably the biggest infrastructure project this country's ever seen. So I say this because the interesting thing is the traditional approach to this would be you kind of hire Halliburton or these big companies, right? And they build these huge tunnels. So that if the problem is the tunnels are too small so that all this stuff comes out, they're looking at tunnels that are 35 feet wide. They're bigger than a subway tunnel. Great piping that would go under all of these seas to clean this up. But the alternative, or to supplement that, is green infrastructure and greenscaping, whereby you stop, through different things, rain gardens and roof and everything, you stop the water from going into the pipes in the first place. And in Cleveland, we're looking, and in other cities, we're looking, that's a big opportunity because who's going to do that work? And the really cool thing is once you build this green infrastructure, you put the gray pipe in, and then that's it, and then you leave, and it's there for 100 years or something. No more jobs. But the green infrastructure, in order to be in compliance with the EPA, once you put the green infrastructure in, you have to maintain it in perpetuity. So it's these ongoing sustainable jobs that are basically sort of green landscaping. So that's a great opportunity, and they're entry-level jobs, great for people without lots of skills. So we could build these, and why not build them as cooperatively owned businesses? So one of the things down the road we're looking at is, could there be an evergreen business like that? So yeah, so our model is lots of different companies and lots of different sectors.
We are out of time.
We're out of time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so go Spokane and keep me informed. Thanks.
All right, you got about 10 minutes for the next session.
Uh-oh.
Grab some coffee, go to that